Is it a sin not to vote? Do Christians have a mandate to vote? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Sage Reverie, a podcast where we seek to live well and live wisely. I'm Mike Wilson.
And I'm Wes Smith.
We live in the great state of Wyoming, and each week, from a biblical perspective, we discuss a trending topic and what others are saying about it. If you're using these episodes for your group, there are discussion questions in the description, and for more information about our ministry, visit church307.com. Hello, Wes. How are you actively involved in politics in any way? Do you have any committees you're a part of, or blogs you regularly write for, or anything that are political?
No, I've been, I vote for sure, but I have over the years had some engagement in a gathering or a committee or whatever, but not at the moment, and it's not frequent for me. You?
Yeah. So, no, I don't. I like watching politics more as sport than as anything else. To me, watching the news feels like watching ESPN sometimes. It's it's a competition more than it is actual real debate or conversations about anything important.
Yeah. And for me, I've generally been a pastor in a community with a bit of a, you're known a bit, right? So you have to be careful about your engagement with politics from, this, right? Yep. From our perspective. So it's just hard, and there is a bit of sport to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, I know on the question of whether or not how involved we should be, there's wide ranging opinions about how Christians should be totally hands off when it comes to politics, because that's all sinful. That's stuff of the world. Then you got the other extreme, which I think most outspoken Christians on this topic are more likely to fall into, is it's our Christian duty to get involved in politics. Right. But most of us probably fall somewhere in the middle. This guy, I'm going to play a clip real quick. This guy does not fall in the middle. Okay. He's quite opinionated on the conversation.
Okay.
Some of you bring politics into the church. You think that politics is spiritual stuff. Politics is of this world. You think it's your duty to be political about this, that, and the other. No, your duty is to serve the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, body, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Don't be talking to me about my spiritual responsibility to vote. I don't have a spiritual responsibility to vote. I have a civic privilege. Don't be telling me that voting is spiritual.
So I actually watched that whole message that he preached, and I really agreed with largely a lot of what he said.
Okay.
That's probably the most provocative clip from it.
Yeah.
But you look at the life of Jesus, and Jesus, so he grows up in Galilee, and just south of the Sea of Galilee is Tiberias, which is the political center, the government center of Galilee. And we don't have any record of Jesus ever going to Tiberias, which is really weird, because that's where economic and everything travels through there. And the fact that he spends no time there says something about his priorities. I mean, he does. It tells us stories about him going to other places that are forbidden to go to. He goes to Caesarea Philippi, which is the false god worship center of the world. And he goes there. It's Jesus, why are you going to Caesarea Philippi? That's a terrible, evil place. He goes to Samaria, which totally, you don't go to Samaria. That is a forbidden place to go. So we do have record of him going some weird places, and never to Tiberias. And so you think about the fact that Jesus spent so little time talking about politics, and you think, okay, I could use that as an excuse to say, let's just totally tune it out. Let's totally ignore that and go in a different direction. Do you see evidence of Jesus getting involved in politics or anything like that?
Yeah, minimally, right? Like you make a good point. It's not just where he visited, but it's the conversations he would really engage in and the ones he would cut short, like the taxation and the other kind of things. Those were very short conversations, very short responses. Yep. And then he would engage much more in depth in part that involved his mission to come and seek and save the lost and to bring the good news of the gospel, right? And I think that it's not that it's wrong. It's not engaging in it isn't a great thing. We can talk about that, but it's where it's at in terms of your life and your priority.
Yeah.
And what matters and what I just talked about a moment ago. Like if I'm in a community and I'm a pastor, my priority in that community is Christ's mission in the lives of people, and that the political part of that is not a priority. And so I have to be careful that my voice is used for what Jesus's voice was. So I think it's a priority, not that there's boundaries on us not getting engaged. We'll talk for purposes of justice and other things.
Yeah.
I believe as a Christian, I do have a responsibility to be involved in those issues.
Right.
And that does bring me into the world of politics. So that's a little provocative for me, a little over the line for me in terms of the tone in which he would say that. I get what he's saying.
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying. Jesus, I think to say he avoided politics would be a little strong from my perspective.
Yeah.
I do think he engaged in some things, but it wasn't the priority. It had its proper place.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the key.
So you talk about the taxation question. So the Pharisees are trying to trap him, and they come to him and say, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Jesus says, whose face is on the coin? And it's Caesar's face. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Right.
Then he says, give to God what is God's. So he's like, he's not saying rebel against politics or rebel against the government.
Right.
He's saying, play your part. Do what you're supposed to do. But don't forget what's most important. Give to God what is God's. And
the Apostle Paul talks about the responsibilities we have in terms of our relationship to the governing world around us and some of those kind of things. So to say that there's these two worlds, one spiritual and whatever, and one's political, and you don't have any engagement in the political world, it's probably an overstatement.
Yeah.
That's not really what Scripture would say.
Yeah. So you mentioned what Paul says about obeying the government. That he's actually talking to Romans.
Right.
He's writing to the church in Rome when he says this, and to tell the church in Rome that they should obey the government. That's a hard command.
That's a hard one.
That means bowing to Nero, or at least obeying Nero, which is a terrible thing to tell somebody that they should be doing. I mean, if we were in Hitler's under his rule, at some point we'd say, no, disobey him, quit following him. But it's weird that Paul doesn't give that clarification.
Right.
He never even says, obey Nero, unless he tells you to do something that's he just says, no, obey Nero, obey the government, but then continue to stay faithful to what God has called you to do. So that's a balancing act.
And we figure that out with wisdom. And we don't, taking extreme positions on either of that is not taking in the whole account of Scripture and figuring that out with wisdom and understanding of Scripture. Because Paul's pretty clear. This matters. Let's take this seriously. Now let's figure out what it means to follow Christ in the context of honoring our government. How's that work? Right? Sure.
So let's create a list of reasons why we should vote.
Okay.
What reasons why we should get involved, at least to the level of voting. One of those would be to obey your government.
Right.
If the government says to vote, Jesus didn't have that option. He did not live in a free society. Right. They weren't voting on their political leaders.
Right.
But it does seem like if they're telling us to obey the government's telling us that we should vote, then we do it for nothing else, just out of pure obedience for the government. Which I don't know. It's not like a law, but.
Right. But we're encouraged to participate. There is, he talks about a civic privilege. I think it's more of a civic duty. And I think when it's not like a sin, perhaps not to, but we can get into that. But I think where we are encouraged to participate and help, we should consider that as a duty and a responsibility. And I think that's the way that Jesus would act in those kinds of ways. So I think that is one reason. But I think more deeply than that would be issues of justice.
Yeah.
And issues of compassion. And those are greater Christian values than civic responsibility. And those encourage me to be engaged and to vote and do those kind of things. So I think there's a number of reasons to vote.
Talk to me more about what it looks like. Like how am I being am I doing justice by voting?
Right. I think an awareness of what's caring for people well and protecting the least of these well.
Right.
An awareness of that. And then voting and engaging in other ways, whether through financial resources or in other ways, to see those things come about. Some of that has to do with the government's involvement, but also some of that might be a nonprofit that's helping in that. But we are to seek justice and to seek mercy.
Yeah.
And the government can be, we would all argue that it can be an irresponsible resource in some ways, not efficient, but it can be a resource to bring about those things.
Yes.
And wherever there are opportunities to bring about justice and mercy, we should be cheerleading that. We should be participating in that. That is a value of following Jesus Christ that I think is important. So I you can talk about a number of issues, and if you see an opportunity to provide mercy to the least of these, or to seek justice for the least of these, participate in that.
Yeah.
Participate in that.
Yeah. One of the arguments that I get into with some friends of mine that are more involved in politics than I am is how much we should allow the government to do justice. How much should we allow the government to help the poor? And isn't that the church's place to do? And we shouldn't be entrusting the government to do that. And so we're not going to solve that problem today.
Right.
It's incredibly complex.
Right.
I'm probably tipping my hand too much, but that conversation has led me to, on a national level, I'm a little bit more conservative in my view of how large the government should be, how much help it should be doing. Right. But on a local level, I'm quite liberal in my understanding of how much the government should be doing, or our local leaders should be doing to help our community. And I like the idea of us. For example, here in Campbell County, we have something called the 1% tax, and it's an optional tax. Every year we vote about whether or not we are going to pass this tax, that everything is taxed at 1%. And that money is reserved for community building type things and supporting nonprofits and supporting infrastructure in our community. And every year this tax passes pretty easily because the people in our community see how, okay, me paying that 1% tax is benefiting my community. Whereas on a national level, taxing everybody 1%, the odds of any of that impacting me seeing the impact of that is quite low. So it just kind of leads me to say, okay, on a local level, I'm a little bit more in favor of our government getting involved with helping those that are most in need.
Yeah, you and I both agree. We would say most reasonable people would. The further away from the front lines you get in caring for people, the more inefficient resources become.
So true. Right.
So we see this in our church denomination. We see this in other organizations where the further away. So we're much more enthusiastic about, I love the 1% idea here in this community. I think it's a great idea. Yeah. Would I have any edits that I would personally make?
Right.
Sure, I would.
Yeah.
But that's part of the engagement process. And so it doesn't mean that we agree. It doesn't even mean that we vote the same way, but we're engaged.
Yeah.
We seek justice and mercy, and we're engaged in that. But you're right. I think most of us, particularly most of us who live in Wyoming, we would certainly say the further those funds get, they get more inefficient. Yeah. We sin, and what we get and others get, it's inefficient.
Yeah.
So we tend to be nationally more conservative that way.
We have here at New Life, we do a lot of concerts.
Yeah.
And just about every concert that comes through is selling some nonprofit. So it's like sponsor this child or whatever adoption or whatever it is that they're promoting some nonprofit. And so because from our stage, these organizations are being promoted, I started doing a little bit of research into, okay, how is this money being spent? Because my people at these concerts are given a lot of money to these nonprofits. And honestly, I got pretty angry in doing that research about how little of the money is for some of these organizations.
Right.
The problem is you can't make a blanket statement.
Yeah, right.
There are some organizations where, a huge amount of the money that is given is going to the front lines, is helping actual people in need. But some of the larger, worldwide organizations, charity organizations, such a small percentage of the money that is given ever make it to the front lines, and they're going to the pockets of a lot of wealthy people. And so I say all that to say, it is just a complicated, complex question to answer to figure out what money is being used well and what isn't. And if the larger the organization is, I think it's generally true that the more inefficiencies there is when it comes to helping people in need.
And yet there's some things that only large organizations can do.
True.
So, you talk, maybe it's medical research, or there's some things in which we just have to accept some inefficiencies. I know in our church scenario, there's some things that only a sort of an international structure can take that challenge on. And so then I think we engage in, we're not going to do away with government.
Yeah.
We're not going to do away with, national taxation, right? Yep. So knowing that, how can I engage in helping make that efficient and smart and not just philosophically oppose all engagement with my national, whether it's the church or whatever. And that's what I encourage people to think through is okay, let's get engaged, but it is going to get more efficient the larger it gets, for sure.
We have a nonprofit that we run here as a church called Blessings in a Backpack.
Right.
And originally it was started by some incredible people at a smaller church, and the ministry kept growing. Blessings in a Backpack kept growing, and eventually it outgrew their small church's ability to manage and maintain because they just didn't have the resources and manpower to make it happen. So they actually came to New Life and said, hey, you guys are larger, you have more resources. Would you take this over? And we did. And since then have been able to grow it because of the resources we have. So that, at some point, larger allows for greater impact to be made. So it's just a messy, complex conversation to have. Can you think of any other good reasons why somebody should vote or should get involved in politics in one way or another?
So several others. One I think it's important to mention, though, is there are people for whom God created and is calling to specifically engage.
Right.
So let's not, we talk about politics in a way that sometimes it's a dirty or a entertainment field or whatever, and it can be all those things, right?
Yep.
But let's remember that just like being a teacher or just like being a doctor or just like you pick, it would go on and on. God actually intends for us to engage and use our gifts to serve others in the way. And there's some among us who are gifted and should be celebrated, just like we would celebrate a nurse who does a great job at his or her job, right? A politician, we are too careful. There's some categories in which to be an authentic Christian and to engage in this way is seemed to be contradictory almost. And we should embrace that calling and that role. So that's something I would say too. Let's stop just being haters and let's say, a Christian could be called to politics and could really engage in it. And then the rest of us should be supportive of that. So that'd be a reason to engage, a reason to vote. This person, they're not perfect. They're going to make mistakes, but you want to support, that'd be another reason, just to support somebody who's trying to live out their God calling in their life.
And I believe most of what is good about our nation, about our communities and our government structure was largely influenced by biblical instructions. And so I believe we are a Christian nation in some ways, whether people want to say it or not, because so much of our infrastructure and our government platform was built upon biblical principles, and everything good that comes out of government, in my mind, comes from some biblical principle that influenced that. And so how terrible would it be if all the Christians and all those who are aware of biblical truth became absent in the political world? If we stopped using our voices, if we stopped using our voting power, man, we'd have a big problem on our hands in our country specifically, because we would lose that so quickly.
Salt of the earth, right?
Yes.
Jesus calls us to be salt. And if the world loses its flavor, it's because we, the salt of the world, we backed out. Can't do it.
So now it sounds a little bit like, we can keep listing reasons why we should be voting, but I think we've gotten our point across that, yes, we believe it's valuable and important for us to vote. So then the question becomes, is it a sin? If it's such a good thing to vote, is it a sin not to vote? And I fall down on the side of no, I don't think it's a sin not to vote in some circumstances. It's all about motivations. And so I know some people who politics became for them somewhat of a god or something that took them to a very unhealthy place personally. And so they needed to say, I'm going to disconnect because it has taken a place. I'm not giving to God what is God's. It has taken a place of priority in my life that it should not have taken. So I need to disengage from politics to focus on things that are more important. And to that, I would say, okay, I see the heart behind that. And that reason seems logical to me.
Oh, yeah. I can think of a dozen reasons why it's not a sin not to vote in a particular situation.
Yeah.
We're talking about a whole way of living where you live wisely and your influence in the world is thoughtful, and you're following Jesus and you're influencing people for good causes and for the right things. But that doesn't mean that in every election I have a responsibility before God. Like so recently we had an election in our community. I believe there were 2 or 3 things on the ballot, two or three elections. There would be a judge, there would be a county commissioner. There were of my options to vote, there were 2 or 3 I just wasn't aware.
Yeah.
I didn't know A or B and any differentiation between A and B. Mm-hmm. I did not feel like I didn't vote.
Yeah.
Because I've wanted the people who had relationship and were engaged on that particular election to decide that election.
Yeah.
I didn't feel responsibility and encouragement to vote. I actually felt it'd be unwise for me to vote.
Yeah.
And on some others, I did vote because I felt like I had an understanding there.
Yeah.
I think we need to engage. I think voting generally is a very positive part of engaging and influencing. But wow, could there be reasons to not vote? Is it a command of Scripture? Absolutely not. Let's not get too carried away about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in the ballot box multiple times and not voted purely because both options are such terrible options.
Yep, there you go.
It's like, there's no way.
Yeah, this isn't helpful at all.
I'm not putting my name next to either one of those.
Right. And this vote doesn't seek mercy, do justice, do anything.
Yep.
So no.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing, scriptural about that.
I've kind of got a personal conviction that I cannot bring myself to vote somebody who is outspoken, who is pro-choice, confidently pro-choice. Now, I realize there's a lot of space between pro-choice and pro-life, and there's a spectrum there. And I'm not saying where I draw the line of what is too pro-choice, but that is such in terms of doing justice, there is nobody I feel that it needs our protection more than the unborn. There are other people that need our protection. But on such a large scale, so many people are being harmed. And for me, doing justice means prioritizing protecting them. And so if I show up at a ballot box and both options are very pro-choice, I have here in Wyoming, we don't run into as much. When I lived in Kansas City, that was the case often when both of my options were very pro-choice people. And so those are times when I chose not to vote because for that reason.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember as Christians, people who follow Christ, keep the things he would care most about a priority when you engage.
Yeah.
That's not always easy. It's not always easy for me.
Yeah.
I have a couple things I'm pretty passionate about. I'm not actually sure Jesus cares a lot about.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And he's working with me on some of those things. But to be honest, I care a lot about him. I don't think so. I want to make sure when I engage, and I'm trying to keep that word because it's more than just voting, but when I engage, do I engage more about the things he would care about? I would say the unborn is something he cares a lot about.
Yeah.
So that should, when I go to vote, that should really drive some stuff. The cause of the poor, those not getting justice. There's a whole list of stuff I think he cares a lot more about than some stuff I could bring up that I care about. And it's about, that engagement. And if I am in a voting booth and there's two candidates and I'm quite sure they are contradictory to what Jesus cares about, then that's something I'll opt out of on a regular basis. Yeah.
We're going to talk next week about how we decide, how we prioritize, and how we decide who we're going to vote for.
I jumped the gun on that, but
that's a good entry.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, how do we decide, and where do we draw the line? I think also we have to decide as a church how involved we will. So that's on an individual level.
That's
how
hard.
Involved will I get?
Right.
And we also have to decide as a church, when we see justice opportunities, how involved do we get? Yeah. There's obviously wide spectrum on this. Here's a guy who likes to get involved.
We certainly don't have everything figured out. We certainly don't do everything right, but we still live in the greatest country on earth. And I said it a couple of years ago, and Tristan said, I can't believe you said that. But I say it again. Listen, if you don't love this country, if there's something you don't like about it and you think somewhere else is better, by all means, go, all right? Because we love our country. And here at Wild Baptist Church, we are patriotic about it. We love the flag. We love our country.
I watched a clip from there that they opened their service with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh.
And I have a hard time with that because I'm like, not that I think it's bad to do the Pledge of Allegiance, but there is a hierarchy of importance. And if we've reserved a portion of our week to be the time in which we worship God, which I would elevate to a much higher level of importance, then it seems a little bit like dumbing down our gatherings on Sunday mornings if we are going to make them about our patriotism. And I have I'm pledging allegiance to a higher cause on Sunday mornings. And so the mixing there becomes difficult, but it is possible to be patriotic about your country and also be, have your top allegiance be to God. The church I grew up in had an American flag on the stage and a Christian flag on the stage. We don't do that here at New Life because I feel like, not because I don't like the American flag, but I don't want to put them on the same level. In my mind, they're not equal. One is much more, one. It's like when you see the flags, the American flag always has to be on the top, and then you can put your other flags, the state flag or whatever, has to be on a lower level and all that, because all that symbolism to say what's most important, what is our highest allegiance to. And I want in our churches and in our gatherings to say, I have a higher allegiance to something greater than my allegiance to my country. Because the reality is, no matter how good America gets, it is still a sinful institution created by man, probably better than others, but it's still a sinful institution that I have to be careful how much I honor it.
Amen to all that. That's a great way of putting it. I don't think I could put it any better than that. You have to be careful about, as Paul says, we're citizens of heaven.
Yeah.
And you have to view life, the United States has done some amazing things and we love it.
Yep.
But it will go.
Yep.
And it is not a lasting institution. And so God and heaven and our citizenship there, that's what it's about. And that has to take preeminence.
Yep.
And that's a church's lane as well. Like that's our calling, that's our mission, that's our purpose. This is the transformation of human beings and with the news of the gospel. We aren't about promoting a country, even though we may love it and honor it. And so, we can honor things in due course with that. Like I'm sure you honor your veterans. I'm sure law enforcement, teachers, nurses, your first responders, right? We honor our community and our culture and our country, but that's not the stream that takes priority for us. Yeah, you said it well.
Yeah, and if our Sundays become patriotic rallies,
that's not.
Then it seems like we've lost our true love.
And it tends to teach people to put their hope in something that you can't build your life around.
So true, yeah.
And you got to be very careful in what we do that you don't do that. There's only one firm foundation. You build your life around, take the institution of family. That's something that the church overemphasizes. And people put their foundation in family, and that family will let you down. And the country, as great as it is no different than that. There's only one foundation. Build your foundation, anything else, marriage, family, you name these great things.
Yeah.
It will let you down.
Wow. Amen. I would like to do a whole episode on that topic. That's a good one. Yeah. We set our eyes on things above because the things of earth will fade away. All of these things, there's no, all these great dynasties of the past. It seems like they were going to last forever.
Yeah, right,
Nobody was going to overthrow Rome.
Right,
it was Babylon had all the power, and it was faith in God that brought Rome to its knees.
Right.
That this we're going through Acts right now as a church, and watching this ragtag bunch of nobody, uneducated, bring Rome to its knees is the most obvious evidence of why we prioritize what we do. We serve the God of all.
Yeah.
He is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and everybody else, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that he is Lord. And so if we are tempted to put our faith in something else, then we have to realign our priorities.
Except for Wyoming. Wyoming may last forever.
Okay. Well, maybe, I don't know.
No, you're right. Absolutely. Of course you're right.
Yeah, that's good. When I'm looking at who I'm going to vote for, and I've got to quit talking about this because we're going to talk about it next week. But for me, I look for an authentic foundation. Like, it's hard to find in politicians. You look at politicians and you see a lot of Enneagram 3s are just looking for a platform, looking for attention. But man, they're few and far between, but that's what I'm searching for.
Okay.
I want to find somebody to vote for that has a foundation that is authentic. I've built my life upon this truth. And even if I don't agree with them on all the issues, I'm going to say, I trust that at least your foundation will hold strong.
Okay.
But if your foundation is just built upon, I'm trying to get more power and more attention, then I'd run away from that one.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. The elections are coming up, so I would invite you to do a little bit of research and figure out how you're going to get involved and who you're going to vote for and what you're going to do justice in our world. We believe it's an important step that you can take as a Christian. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next week. Sage Reverie.